time, and our family were kind of on the heels of the Utes, which is something that we all have recognized, respected, and really tried to honor the entire time of our growing up in such a special area as South Route. My dad, Chuck Perry, here is going to tell you about our family history today, and we're part of the King family who helped settle Steamboat, and part of the King and Perry and Charbonnel family in South Route, Nigeria Park. So my father, Chuck Perry, fellow Sirocco graduate, and graduated Western State College in June of 1970. He has a degree in phys ed, a minor in history. We're all big history buffs in our family, and had a teaching certificate. He coached wrestling and did his student teaching at Aspen High School. So again, he graduated June 6th of 1970, and on July 10th of 1970, not even June 10th?
4 days later.
4 days later, the guy received a summons to report to Denver for a draft physical. And my dad was actually the last person drafted out of Routt County for Vietnam. So he was instructed to report in December 23rd of 1970 for induction into the Army. And so he then just enlisted in the Air Force, hoping to be selected into the pilot selection process, which he was. He accepted the appointment as a navigator, not really knowing what they did, and not knowing that he'd never probably touched the flight stick, but that he would spend a lot of time navigating and doing a lot of quick math to plot the lines. Dad served 2 deployments to Southeast Asia. He was supporting 78 combat missions and was in the Air Force until 1978. He actually met my mom at the Loring Air Force Base outside of Presque Isle, Maine, which is why I am standing here today. And in addition to Southeast Asia, Thailand, which he commissioned some custom bell-bottom cowboy suits to be made, which you'll see at the Routt County Fair here in a couple days at the fashion show. He also served in England, Spain, and Turkey. And during that time, he and his brother and his parents corresponded, and we have some very nice and entertaining letters about what he was up to and what was happening here at the ranch. So in 1978, he concluded his service in the Air Force, and then he and my mom moved to Taponis to the ranch in 1980, and my little sister Kate was born in the middle of a snowstorm. And so that's a little bit about my dad and Chuck Perry. Please stand up.
Well, thank you. Lynn and Charlotte, if you can't hear me, just start waving, show you how to something, and I'll run and turn around. Anyway, we're going to discuss the Perry family history in Nigeria Park from 1911 through 1984 today. I'm going to start with my great-great-grandfather, Benjamin Franklin Perry. He was born in Kentucky, moved to Iowa with the family in 1855. His wife was named Adeline, which they got married in August of 1862. It was a short honeymoon because he was called in October of that year and fought for the Union in the 31st Iowa Infantry. They were under the command and were deployed by William Tecumseh Sherman, if you remember any of his leadership and the campaigns he was involved with. That Iowa Infantry fought at Vicksburg, Chattanooga, Kennesaw, then marched to Atlanta, Savannah, through the Carolinas, into Richmond, and finally into Washington, D.C. This unit was comprised of 1,405 men. They lost 1 officer, 27 enlisted men in combat, while 275 people died from disease. He was discharged in June of 1865 in Louisville, Kentucky. Returning home to Iowa, his father gave him a team of horses, a wagon, and advised him to make his life elsewhere. Only 2 of those 17 brothers and brother-in-law had fought for the Union. So he moved further west from Iowa to Seward, Nebraska, which took 3 weeks by covered wagon. And he and Adeline had hopes of finding good homestead land. They found none, but they bought a quarter section of railroad land. That farm was setback after setback during the 6 years on that farm. Family sickness, poor crops, prairie fires, grasshoppers devoured everything in view, including onions. Winter meals consisted of baked beans, baked squash, fried bacon, and coffee made of parched wheat. The railroad reclaimed the homesteaded ground, but Benjamin Franklin purchased another farm of 160 acres that had a 2-room sod house. This property proved productive. The ground was paid off in a few years. A home was built, a barn was built, and they purchased another 80 acres. They were frequently visited by Indians who were starving and often asked for food. Mrs. Perry never feared them because she had a big coach dog by her side who hated Indians. Now their son, my great-grandfather, William Scott Perry, was born in Tipton, Iowa in 1866. He grew up farming, owned his own farm when he married Bertha Bone. Bertha Bone's father was a wheeler dealer, and he convinced his son and son-in-laws that they had to participate in his investments, and he relocated them and placed them on different farms and properties. After a brief life in Missouri, Scott and Adeline Bertha was sent to Kearney, Nebraska, 1903 for a short period, where they relocated in the same year to Minden, Nebraska. In 1907, they moved to Jewell, Kansas, then Daytona, Kansas, where they managed a hardware store and a post office. At that time, the population was 34. 2 years later, they were in Smith Center, Kansas, to take possession of a hardware store and farm machinery business. However, in the early spring of 1911, that store was traded. They'd only been there 2 years. But the father-in-law, Mr. Bone, traded that store for an 800-acre ranch in Tecumseh, Colorado. Scott and Bertha had a small family of 5, 3 girls and 2 boys. Bertha had conflicting thoughts about leaving Kansas and that long trip into Colorado. So she thought about it. She wasn't sure she wanted to go, but Winfield Scott, you know, he had reservations from his experiences that he had when he grew up, but he was finally convinced he should take the trade and move to Colorado. So Winfield Scott and his 2 sons, Cecil, who was 19, and Ora Scott, my grandfather, was 17, they loaded a freight car with household goods, a wagon, a team of horses, and 2 to 3 milk cows. They arrived in Steamboat Springs on the rail, where the railroad had just been completed in 1909. Finding their way to Ageria Park and the Rancho Tuponas, they found a home. However, the doors were gone, no glass was in the windows, and cows had been roaming freely through the 4-room structure that was to serve them as a home. Scott, Ivan, and Oat began shoveling out the manure with scoop shovels, clearing the ground to find the cleanest dirt possible, where they were able to sleep, cook, and eat. They put up a small portion of hay from ground that had not been cultivated or irrigated to feed the livestock through the winter. That winter of 1911 was one of those worst winters that you could record. You can not see the flat tops, The only view was the snowdrifts and the blue sky looking above. They had grown up farming, had very few concepts or first-hand experience in ranching. However, they knew they needed horses. In Toponis, at the time, there were 4 or 5 sawmills, which allowed the 3 men to work during the winter to save more money to buy teams. 1912 brought many challenges. Ivan was sent back to Kansas to go to school. Wife Bertha arrived, proceeded to have Winfield Scott take her and daughter Bertie to Yampa to buy wallpaper, paint, and cloth to fix up the house. That trip was an all-day trip with buckboard, requiring about 18 miles from Yampa to the ranch. At that time, Toponis had a 3-month school term, which Ora had been enrolled in as a 6th grader at age 17. After 3 weeks of school, a horse fell over backwards with him, causing severe injuries. So Winfield Scott sent word back to Kansas to have Ivan return to work on the ranch. That was the extent of both sons' education. The one behavior that Winfield Scott passed on to his son Benjamin was that Winfield Scott always had a horse in the barn. It was saddled with a 30-30 in the scabbard, ready to ride night or day. So he rotated those mounts day and night in case something happens, the doctor, or who knows, you need a horse, you were ready to ride. All 3 men continued to work the sawmills, gradually increasing the purchase of horses and buying a few cows from neighbors who were moving on to other pursuits. Now, Ora Scott married Mary Jane Bird from the Bird family in Yampa, Colorado in 1818. May had passed the teacher's exam and taught 8 grades of school at the Watson Creek Schoolhouse, with another year teaching the 8 grades at the Pinnacle Schoolhouse for 1 term. Married, they lived on the ranch and homesteaded an additional 640 acres. They built their cabin among the Quakers next to a good spring, raised a good garden, and Granny had an unfettered view of the flat tops of the Conus Plains and loved the views looking to the west. After proving up on the homestead, they relocated that cabin, moving it to a bench on Toponis Creek where they were protected from the wind and the blowing snow. Later, they purchased the home ranch from his father, Winfield Scott, bought more cattle and breeding horses. Those horses were used for work and ranch duty. Oat made his money maintaining the roads from Toponis to the Rock Creek Stage House, located on the Gore Pass Road, then south from Toponis to the top of Red Divide in west of Yampa. At one time, he owned 50 teams of horses. In addition to building roads, the horses were used, of course, in the hayfields. Small farms for the home place were bought when those who had raised row crops of lettuce, spinach, and potatoes could not survive the downturn of prices and the vanishing productivity of the land, which had started to return to sagebrush. That portion of the local economy that the farmers sold their lettuce, spinach, and tomatoes to faltered after the completion of the railroad, and the cattle prices, however, remained steady through the Depression. Times were tight, but they were able to make the budget. Other parcels were acquired through tax sales until the home ranch included 3,000 acres that were in turn shared by the 4 Perry members. Kay and Patty on the Bar O, Mary Jean and Junior at the Ponus, Bob and Sissy at the home place, lower out to Ponus Creek, and then Oates' other daughter, Shelley and Georgia Klumker, lived up at Georgia Creek on the crossing place, and my grandfather bought a pasture that he ran steers in that later Oates sold to Kelly in Georgia. As the ranch land continued to improve, Oates had ridden for bigger ranches, rode cool and the grazing permit, which ran from Gore Pass down towards Blacktail, north to the Morrison Creek. Come on in. Oh, say hello. Those are my daughter and my granddaughter, Kate and Marissa. But Oates always loved riding cattle, the Bermudes, and he enjoyed joining Jim Norval, who would gather cattle up around Hans Peak and trail them through Steamboat up the valley, taking the herd to Wolcott to put on the rail. So the cows were gathered and arrived just above Wolcott, or where it's now the Four Angle Ranch, where they sorted, 3,000 to 4,000 head of cattle by brand, and took them down to the rail siding at Wolcott, loaded them on cattle cars for delivery to the market. The Perrys trailed their market cattle from Toponis to Yampa to be shipped by rail when the stockyard, because that stockyard had certified scales shortly after the rail was completed. Oates served as president of the Colorado Cattlemen's Association, sold memberships from that became the formation of the Yampa Valley Electric Association, and then served as the director as it was established. Oates, in cooperation with the Georgia Park Rowing Club, built a suitable arena with grandstands above the home place. To be a member of the rodeo club, you had to have a sponsor. Oh, and you had to have your own horse. All right. Then the Ponus Rodeo was a good draw. Sometimes 800 to 1,100 people attended. As young boys, my brother and some of the Kirby boys had to clean up the trash, a lot of beer cans, pop cans, whatever around, and clean up the arena for the next rodeo or whoever was coming to practice roping. At the other end of that pasture, next to the old highway, Oates and the boys and people around Toponis built a softball field, and they put chicken wire up for a backstop. People would know that as Ball Diamond Hill, and park in the bar ditch and meet and play softball. Baseball, that was their sport. We have an old Toponis baseball jersey that those men had to be tough to wear them, but they were made of wool. No. I would have to be wearing long underwear to walk around with something like that. When Oates and May retired, approximately 1947, they left the ranch and moved to Yampa, built a house, and they also purchased a winter home in Mesa, Arizona. And I love to go visit them in the winter because they had a couple citrus trees in the backyard. There's nothing that's so fresh and tasty as a tree-picked grapefruit or an orange. But he returned in the summer and he visited each family on the local ranches, helping with any work and helping them decide what needed to be done. My brother and I jumped at the chance to catch him a donkey, as he called his horses, because he always had a few horses around that he left at the ranches. When he showed up, he would have one to ride. Now, if you went with Oates, you had to go up a lot earlier. And we're talking 4 o'clock, easy. We had to milk 5 head of cows, eat breakfast, saddle the horses, because we had to get the cows before the sun came up. We never owned a horse trailer, but we did a lot of riding. And those were the times that I always enjoyed. And when he came, you knew he needed a sack lunch. So my mother would pack a couple sandwiches, and I enjoyed taking a break with Granddad. We seldom had a fire, but we had this time to eat and listen to some stories. My father, Junior Franklin Perry, happened to be born in December, on Christmas Day, 1920. The same day, December 25th, that his mother had been born on. The family said it was 40 below that morning, and I believe it. I lived in that house for several years along the river. It did get cold. I knew that my dad, and I felt that he missed a holiday because his birthday was on Christmas, so we always tried to give him extra presents. But my dad loved hunting, fishing, and horses. And when his grandfather, Benjamin Franklin, and we always, or not Benjamin, Winfield Scott, we call him Scott. He always loved to stay with Scott up in the middle place, because Scott would leave the kerosene lights on at night, and they would sit on the bed, take turns with a 22 single-shot rifle using 20-shoot shorts, and shooting the mice that were running around. Now, he had seen a lot of horses, and there were some people that had some horses that gaited. So he wanted a horse that would perform a gait. So it took him 8 years to make his dream horse. That horse was a half thoroughbred, half Tennessee Walker, and a quarter Morgan. He taught that mare how to jump fences because he hated running around the pasture to find a gate to open and chase the deer or the elk. That horse loved to hunt, and she would let Dad know whether they were in with deer or elk. However, she was a one-man horse. If I went out to saddle her, or my grandfather tried to saddle her, he would step on your foot. She would lean into you, where you push you against the wall. And then, if you wanted to catch her, she didn't feel like it, you'd spend all day, at least a couple hours, chasing her from pasture to pasture, because he'd just run up to the next fence, jump the fence, and away she'd go. Well, I want to talk about my father and the two areas of transition that he accomplished. One was the necessity of efficiency in the haying season, and the two of finding better genetics for herd improvement. I mean, the first one, my grandfather bought a tractor in 1947, another one in 1948, a bigger tractor, a 9N in 1954, and later on 2 small international tubs used for sweep brakes. They were 11 horsepower international farm-alls. And Bob Schendorf, who lived up at Jerry Creek, but he lived at worked for Lucan's Garage down here in Steamboat. He added another transmission so you could make those tractors run in reverse, and you had 4 speeds in reverse, so your back wheels were actually running forward, and they used those 2 tractors to sweep right and bring the hay to the stack. So he had seen the use of 5 tractors, 2 to mow with, 2 to bring the hay in, 1 to run the plunger or rake with. So he started looking around to become more efficient. He bought in 1968 a 96 horsepower Minneapolis Moline tractor, Hesston big loafer, 68. They had a 60 model, and that produced a loaf of hay weighing 10 to 12 tons. Now, he didn't like the labor-intensive conversion to baling hay. You know, he had to run around, throw them on a slip, take them to the stack yard, and stack them again. With the stacker and a windrower, you were down to two tractors. You had, well, actually, one tractor, because of course it's a windrower. So the windrower cut the hay, the stacker would run behind it and pick it up. So you didn't have to rake it, and got rid of that.
You want me to show the video?
Yeah, you can.
You keep talking about the hay, and then we'll go back to the cattle.
The other issue that we had while we were haying is we needed people to stack hay. So we would call the employment agencies up in Denver, and they would find 2 men to volunteer to come stack hay for 2 weeks. We would meet them either in Steamboat or Taconas, depending which route Trailways was running. The first thing we did was bring them to FM lights, buy them a set of work shoes, fairly Levi's, shirt, a couple pairs of gloves, and hope that they would last 2 weeks, because, you know, they probably came from Skid Row and they hadn't ridden. You know, they were hungover. They did the job.
Yeah.
So, anyway, we kind of got tired of that too, and so Junior bought a Hesston Hydrofort, and he mounted it on the back of a Yampa fire truck that had been sold, and they used that in place of the men to stack hay. And because it was mobile, you could chain it up and use it in the winter to load the team and sled and feed the cattle. And back to the horse. I got to tell you about his horse. He could ride her into a beaver dam and fish. And then when the things got cold, the bear would get out of the water and go back in and catch some more fish. In he left the ranch at 14 to go to work with the DeBerard Cattle Company out of Kremling. Kremling was a legacy ranch, winning the Big Four, Grand Champions in Chicago, Grand Champions in Kentucky, in Kansas City, Grand Champions in Omaha and Denver, and also the International Carcass competition in 1935. 1944, he married Mary Jean King, who had a granddaughter, Preston King. She graduated from DU with a teaching certificate and began teaching school in Georgia Park, where she rode horses from the ranch to the school over on Georgia Creek. Later, she taught at school in McCoy, served on the Soraka School Board, was active in the Republican Party. However, she owned a few sheep. And my brother and I, had to drop a lot of sheep fence. We didn't like them. My dad just laughed at us because he wasn't going to have anything to do with them. But in addition to teaching, she opened her own Taconas library with a state grant and served as a director on the Yampa Valley Election Association for 30 years. During Junior's time as a young man, he got good grooming and clipping cattle for the show ring, whether it was steers, bulls, or heifers. He showed the first heifer, $50,000 heifer in the San Francisco cow palace. Okay, and as you look at these slides, you're going to see genetic recessive genes being placed in not only the Hereford breed, but all breeds of cattle. And you're going to see that the height of these cows were 3.5 feet tall, very, very short. And because the dad had been traveling around and seeing the different types of breeds, starting in the late 40s, he knew he did not want to take his cows in that direction. Anyway, during the 30s and 40s, the dad and the ranchers would work and get ready for the livestock show in Denver. Somebody would make a phone call to the railroad. They'd drop a rail car up in Yampa. That car was dropped off later into Ponis. My uncle Kelly Klumker was the only one in the valley that was baling hay, and he would bring a sled load of baled hay to the car into Ponis, and everybody would load the hay, force the cows on, away they go to Denver. Denver was the first time any of those cows got a bath. Usually the weather was cold, the hours were long, but they were able to have fun. Now the hay that was taken with that car was a good advertisement for the Klunkers, because Kelly had made a contact with the Arapahoe racetrack, which I think was in Commerce City, and the Foss Arabians in the Golden area. So in addition to raising hay for himself, he was able to raise hay for those two clients. Taxis at the stock show charged by the minute. So if you left the stock show and going downtown, it was going to cost you a few dollars because it was congested. Not as bad as it now, but you couldn't make a good run downtown. The boys hung out at the sorting pens behind the cattle chutes. One night, I don't know if any rodeo fans are here, but Casey Tibbs, the legendary bronc rider, he traveled in a pink Cadillac with a briefcase and speeding tickets. One night, he appeared not to be able to ride his horse, so they tied him up and put him in a manger. But Casey got loose and went to the bucking chute, climbed on the horse, fell off, the horse stomped on him, hurt his knee, broke his shoulder, and sidelined him for several months. Now I saw Casey put on a demonstration ride at Old Cheyenne when Casey was 65 years old. I've never seen anybody ride like him. He had pink chaps with black highlights. And when he rode, it wasn't the traditional spurring from the shoulder, springing back. It was like this. It was riding a bicycle. And that caused that horse to spin from the spur on the left to the spur on the right. That horse is just continually dancing. But he really impressed me. In 1954, now Marissa, can you read about this last cow, this Angus?
Yeah, this is the bloodline concentrated down into one animal they nicknamed Short Snorter. And the nickname in this instance was unfortunate because snorter dwarfism would soon devastate the purebred beef industry. And the quote we found from an article called On Pasture, all research was done by a woman named Kathy Roth. Their short, dish-shaped heads and large tongues made it difficult for them to breathe, so they sounded like they were snorting. Probably similar to like a little pug or a French bulldog.
And in about 1954, Dad was chosen to deliver 30 foundation type Herefords and deliver them to Bill Boeing in Seattle. Cows from E.F. Schindorf to Ponis, Jack Rigger in Yampa, and Fred DeBerard and Kremling were routed in 2 train cars and delivered to Boeing up in Seattle. He enjoyed seeing the fish being caught out of the Columbia River and was very happy that a conductor allowed him to ride in the caboose and finally warm up after that long trip. Boeing showed him some airplanes, gave him a good meal, gave him good hospitality. And those cattle were later sold to the Holden Ranch and became part of Holden Line 1 breeding line. So if you ever see any pedigree references to the Domino, that's a Line 1, and those go back to Kremling, Toponis, and Yapa. And Dad's family partnership with OS changed when the Oats death, and he started over. But he had noticed that the newborn calves lacked vigor. And seeing the introduction of those type of genetics into the breed, he was convinced that the Colorado Hereford Registry contained too many recessive genes and was starting to produce dwarf-like characteristics. About that time, Jack Rager had competed in the Hereford show in the National Western, where he discovered the secretary of the Colorado Hereford Association was injecting salt water into the animal to display bigger muscle and bigger bones throughout the legs. So Jack, being Jack, I don't know if anybody remembers Jack, but anyway, Jack got a buggy whip and went to the Stockman's Bar, which is the hangout for the National Western, downtown Denver, got on the bar, the buggy whip, and proceeded to let everybody know what was going on. And he knew at the conclusion of that talk, his cows would never be fairly judged. So he sold them. And then he went to Angus. But well, in about 1968 or so, Dad went to the Wyoming Hereford Ranch up in Old Cheyenne and found some bulls that he liked, so he bought a few of them. But he learned that there was going to be a dispersal of that herd, so he asked them where they got their foundation cattle. And he said, "You're getting from the Bloom Ranches in Castor, Alberta." So he ordered a sale catalog, went through the information, and called up the foreman, George, and placed a bid on some of the prospects. I think he got 4 bulls that first year, getting bid on them, and he drove up to Sweetgrass, Montana from Toponis, and that's a long ride. There's a lot of sagebrush between here and there. But he brought him back to Toponis, and then becoming a repeat customer, they established a good relationship with Bloom Ranches and some of the Canadian chuck wagon racers who would win at Calgary and then were eligible to compete in Cheyenne. The Bloom Ranches would deliver those bulls around Thanksgiving. So if you research any of the Hereford lineage and you find a pedigree with the Wabash, that is a Bloom Ranch cattle. Now Alan Bloom was the first Canadian ever to judge the National Western, and he did it back-to-back 1980 and 1981. He passed away on February 9th of this year. Well, you know, some of these papers are out of order. In 1970, to complement the Hesston stack loafer and the hang operation, Hesston produced a stack feeder and mover. So they brought the experimental machine to the ranch and tried it out, but the frame broke. They took it back to Kansas, reconfigured it, improved the stack feeder. Number 98 was purchased that fall and was the first one on the western slope. After 1968, horses were never used again to put up the hay or feed. That Hesston team that came to Toponis died in a plane crash in Australia. about 1974. Well, that kind of concludes the history of the Perrys. I'm just going to give you highlights from my ancestors. We'll start with the Byrd family. William Byrd was born in Kentucky. His family moved to Missouri, and after the conclusion of this, if you can see their migration route on this slide, we'll put it up on that table. But in 1974, he moved to Florissant, Colorado from Missouri. Traveled with 2 covered wagons and trailed 20 head of milk cows across the Santa Fe. But at that time, he had his wife and 9 children, the youngest being less than a year old. I don't think that was the best trip his wife could have chosen. Halfway across Kansas, they traded for the smaller team of mules for a team of oxen. They located in Florissant, Colorado, grouped up on a homestead, and built a sawmill. Bill Byrd was a blacksmith, while his sons got in the freighting business, and they would run freight from Leadville to Lima and Fairplay. Some of the hitches were 6 to 10 to a wagon. In 1981, one of the Byrd's team was stolen, and he learned from a prospector that the team had been seen in Georgia Park. So Bill Byrd, Johnny Phillips, S.D. Wilson tracked them to Yampa, where they found them tied to the aspen grove currently occupied now by the Van Camp cabins. He took them back to Florissant, but decided he was moving to Georgia Park. The next year, Bill Byrd, 2 sons, Tom and Lauren, damn it, excuse me, I forgot the chaps. Okay, all right. So anyway, Bill and Byrd and Tom and Lauren, they returned to Yampa, bought a dump rake and tools to build some log cabins. On August 4th of the next year, 1982, they returned to find that they had been robbed. Tobacco, guns, ammunition, and 2 pairs of boots were gone.
Chuck, I think you've said 1982 a couple times tonight.
Oh, I'm hard of hearing.
Huh?
I'm sorry, but it would be 100 years earlier.
Been 8.
Yeah, all right. And I didn't wear my glasses. Yeah. Well, anyway. They got in pursuit. They rode to Ed Watson's home, just west of their ranch in Yampa, where it happened to be a Leadville from Yampa was there. So the 2 men, Bill, Lauren, and Tom, formed a posse and started tracking the thieves down. They were spotted with a pack mule in Oak Creek Canyon, and where the thieves had knew that they were being pursued, so they took up a position somewhere in the canyon behind some rocks. So Tom was the first one to come into view, and he was shot. Ed Watson was lucky. He got creased in the ear, and the hole was in his hat. The 2 outlaws were shot, left where they died, and they discovered John Phillips' boots were on one of the outlaws, so they pulled them off. They packed up the mule again and got most of their stuff back, in addition to 2 pistols and 1 rifle that had been stolen from the ferry on the Colorado River. Tom Byrd was buried on the ranch. The dead had no identification, but foreign coins were found in the pockets. The bodies were left where they lay, and a few days later, James Crawford and W.H. Deaver came up from Steamboat and buried them. Now, my grandmother, Mary Jane Byrd, was the daughter of Frank Byrd, and Frank Byrd and his son Ulysses Grant were guides for Teddy Roosevelt. And I'm really sorry I didn't bring those chaps, because Lauren was left-handed, and on the inside of his chaps he had a holster for a pistol. You would never see it. You would never see it unless he pulled it out and ate it.
Looks like that looks like Ferris Kirby on the Palomino. And this is Dick Jones here. Dick Jones now. Let's see, O.S. Perry sitting on the fence there on the, with the light hat, the gray hat. Oh, this is O.S. Perry again. Now this was taken on Oat Perry's ranch here. It's at Ed Harper's dehorning. I guess Dick's running the gate. And it looks like Oat Perry was bringing a calf in. Is this? K. Perry with the shirt tail out. Dick holding the key. This is taken up on the gore. Probably Little Rock Creek, huh? Must have got through Brandon. Now they're gonna catch your lunch. Oh man, they got a bunch of them. Oh, Ferris Kirby fixing the fire. There's Oat Perry on the right and Dick Jones putting the branding irons in. Oh, that's where that was. Just over in Coberly Gulch, east of Toponis. Okay, in this corral, it was a few years later, just finished up branding, and the lightning struck and killed one of the horses in the corral. It's got some nice calves. This is looking west from Coberly Gulch. I'm spraying the cows after the branding. Toponis Rock, red. Sleeping lion, huh? Look like Bob Munzert spring, Bob Munzert. Spraying for flies, lice, and ticks here.
Stacks have now settled in the picture. It's later in the fall. We see the feeds ripen.
These are the chaps that belong to Lauren Bird. These chaps are probably 100, well, at least 1885, maybe before. They probably had them before they came to Colorado. And you'll notice on this belt buckle, they've got a brand carved in there. Looks like a 3 lazy quarter circles. They're well preserved and old. On the left-hand side of the chaps, you'll notice they've been patched up and sewn several times. The interesting thing about Uncle Lauren's chaps, Uncle Lauren was a left-handed cowboy. We know he was left-handed because on the inside of his left leg was a holster for a pistol. I had never considered putting a pistol on the inside of the chap. I had never considered putting a pistol on the inside of the chaps, but let me see what you think. Here I've got the chaps on. I'm sitting horseback, riding around, going to town. Nobody would ever suspect that there was a pistol on the inside of these chaps.
And there it is. Awesome. Thank you, Dad.